I have to say that I see so many beloved faces, people that I have known for 40, 50 years, and former students, colleagues, and in all sorts of ways. People whose weddings I've been to, former students, friends from 35 plus years of a writing group, and just there's something really remarkably special about staying in the same place for more than 50 years and just seeing all these. I thank you all. It's so wonderful to see you. I might cry.
Crying is welcome.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, write a poem about it.
We have virtual tissues available.
Well, we are honored to celebrate you, Mary Jane. And as we are just a minute past 7, I'll slowly get the ball rolling and just say welcome to everyone who has just joined. And we are, if you are unaware, if maybe you found yourself in the wrong Zoom room, we are celebrating Mary Jane Dickerson and her poetry. And I will not be giving a lengthy introduction. I'll first say I'm really honored to be here hosting this. I wish we could all be here in person. It is a benefit that many of you who may not have been able to join an in-person reading can be here to hear and see Mary Jane and celebrate her and listen to her poem. So glad you are all here. And I don't know if you're ready, Neil, for me to pass the Zoom torch to you, but I'll just say thank you, Mary Jane, and I'm honored to be here. I'll just be behind the scenes Zooming here, listening, and this is being recorded. So I think after the event, I'll be posting it on the Sundog website and you can share it with folks who were unable to make it. So take it away, Neil, if you are ready.
Thanks, Frankie. I am the one who will give the lengthy introduction, not too long. So I'm Neil Shepard, president of the Sundog Poetry Board of Directors, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to tonight's poetry reading, celebrating our illustrious co-founder of Sundog, Mary Jane Dickerson, who has been with this small but mighty organization from the very beginning. Mary Jane has supported Sundog with her enormous vitality, her wise counsel, financial generosity, and hands-on action in our poetry programming, especially with one of our flagship events, Justice and Poetry for All, which she and Judy Arnell created from whole cloth. And she has also led many writing retreats, workshops, interview series, and poetry readings over the years. And I'm sure I've forgotten 5 or 10 other things, right, Mary Jane? So tonight, we're thrilled to have Mary Jane read from her own work, which she'll do for 30 to 40 minutes, and then answer questions from the audience, us, or listen to our tributes to her in the remaining minutes. Here's a bit of biographical information about Mary Jane. She was born and raised in North Carolina, where she graduated from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and then from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, after which she began her teaching career at Campbell College in North Carolina. After that, she moved to Vermont, where she has lived ever since, teaching literature and writing in the English department at the University of Vermont, where she remained for more than 30 years. Mary Jane also participated as a writer and faculty member at the New England Young Writers Conference at Breadloaf in Middlebury. Her scholarly work has taken her to Japan, where she gave a series of lectures at 2 universities in Nagoya, and to South Africa, where she taught at the University of Fort Hare for a semester. For many years, Mary Jane has offered an annual workshop on reading and writing poetry, and she has generations of talented students who sing her praises. Mary Jane has published 2 books of poems, Tapping the Center of Things and Water Journeys in Art and Poetry. Her poems appear in many literary magazines, as well as in the anthology Roads Taken, Contemporary Vermont Poetry, edited by Sidney Lee and Shara Denord. And as I've already noted, Mary Jane has been one of the guiding lights of the Sundog Poetry Center. And now, as she steps down from the board, we're happy to celebrate her and her poetry tonight in this virtual reading. So please help me welcome Mary Jane Dickerson. Thanks.
I've never been more honored than by you, Neil, and by all of you gathered here tonight. I would like to dedicate this reading to a special person, and that person is a member of my family who died last night. And my sister's husband in North Carolina, Frank Webb McCracken, who was as important to all of us as any brother-in-law, really brother, could be. When my husband died, Webb really became father to my children as well. So my heart is with my sister in North Carolina and her family, and I'll be going to join them later this week. But I just wanted to say something to honor Webb, because I've known him since he was 12 years old, and I was 13 or so. So he's been very much part of my life. And the title of my reading, I know readings don't always have titles, but I wanted to make a title in order to allow me to select poems. And these are all unpublished poems, except for one that was in Roads Taken, because I have stacks of unpublished poems, and I keep writing more. And I'm 84, and who knows what I'm going to do with all of these poems. I'm trying to arrange them into a book. So this is sort of a tentative title for arranging some of them. And the title of the reading is Speaking Southern from Vermont. And I want to acknowledge the encouragement and the love of so many people who kept me at it. And if Tamara had not asked me to join her to do Sundog's work, my life would have been very different. And it's been far richer for that, and for all of you gathered here tonight. And I want to say that there are Vermont poets like Hayden Carruth, T. Allen Broughton, David Budbill, and David Huddle, who gave me such encouragement and read my work and offered such sound advice. And I want to acknowledge them. And all the workshop students, my UVM students, and my students since UVM, and I see numbers of you here tonight who have been part of our Sundog workshops. And so I will begin. And I'm juggling papers, so if I just drop something. The title of this poem is White and Black. February snows keep coming, falling in a heavy silence from the ashen sky, hour after hour, turning day into night, night into day. Vermont's northerly peaks and valleys flatten into an expanse without dimension, a whiteness that washes all other color away, shaping in me that lingering sense after all these years of always being out of place, always a stranger in an even stranger land. February snows bring me home to what I have missed even more than a familiar and gentle Southern landscape, even more than the intimate culture of family and place. February snows bring me home to what I have missed most from the pulse and rhythm of everyday life, to what turned life itself into possibilities of improvisation. That daily presence of African Americans, Black people whose names with cadence and timbre of voices still reverberate in memory, whose faces still appear everywhere across my homescape and theirs, deep in rural North Carolina. But from my window, only bare branched trees stirred by winter's wind into black hieroglyphics on white parchment break up a whiteness given shape and meaning by those shadowed contours and lines scripted in black. February's white loneliness hollows out warmth from the body leaning into the howl of blizzard knocking at the door. Yet each February, frozen into place, stirs longing for a landscape soon to be warmed by human figures moving in black and white, whose lives matter, each to the other, whose kinship goes beyond blood, whose intertwined histories of boundaries and bondages shape who we are, who we must become, each in relationship to the other. The next poem is a poem that I wrote after a trip to Washington, D.C. with my dear friend Roxanne Lynn, whom some of you know and was a former colleague at UVM. It's called Out of This Darkness. On visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture with Roxanne, October 2018. Warm October sun settled on the shining faces of those standing in line, hardly moving, waiting their turn to enter the shade of the museum's ascending corona, with its entwined metal filigree, its gunmetal gray turning golden against the deepening clarity of a sapphire sky. Flickering sunlight cast shadows that moved over the darkening stone underneath, making it appear as if the massive building were about to jettison its mooring on the mall to sail away home, to fly away home to Africa. Herded by groups into a giant elevator, those wearing faces of many hues, faces bearing traces of the many peoples who inhabit this land, descend slowly, all together, through a layered history of buried memory in an exploration that became an excavation of the vast underground of what once was in word, in object. Harriet Tubman's gospel hymns, Matthew Brady's images of slave dealers, Birch and Company, a British slaver's name carved into wood to read Captain Phillips, beside an iron leg shackle, its size forged for a child. These and more shaped this womb-like place into our collective intertwined past, yet struggling toward the birth of the nation, yet living in our imagination. Out of this darkness, a shaft of light revealed a statue of heroic lineaments, wearing a calm, cool reason in the near mythic aspect of a founding father. Thomas Jefferson, one leg jutting forward, this thrusting figure against a backdrop of names inscribed on bricks, names of the many enslaved people who created the wealth necessary to fill his library's shelves with the philosophers who gave him the language of liberty and justice for all, except for his darker brothers and sisters, some his own blood children, who labored in the vast fields and forests surrounding Monticello. Within this aureole of light, holding back the darkness, two women stood, so close as if to reach out and touch the stony folds of Jefferson's breeches, so close to each other their arms touched when they shifted their stances, silently gazing toward, then reading the inscribed names, sometimes whispering, Nancy, Sheba, Will, baby girl. One woman began a low crooning of to the slow motion of her head from side to side. The woman beside her responded with an emphatic and drawn out exactly in exaggerated syllables tuned to the other woman's rhythmic sounds to create a mini drama enacted in this womb-like space, laboring to give birth to a young nation's yet conflicted history. The first woman turned to the other, their words a testament to what was taking place, and looked deep into her eyes, saying, "You give me hope. Then, may I give you a hug?" The women, one African American, the other European American, both speaking in a language inflected with the tones of a South each knew, held each other close in a long embrace before gazing into each other's eyes, their tears consecrating what had become a moment of reconciliation. I sent this poem to Lonnie Bunch III, who is responsible really for the energy to make that museum come into being. And I got a personal letter back from him in less than 2 weeks. A change of pace. This is an ekphrastic poem written about something that was part of a Fleming exhibit. The exhibit, I've forgotten the name of it, but with Andy Warhol and all kinds of figures such as Andy Warhol. This is called A Woman Smoking a Cigarette. After Tobacco Rose, a 1965 screen print by Mel Ramos. There is something about a woman smoking a cigarette. The way she purses her lips in a kiss around its tip that ignites a breathless desire and brings those around her to lean in close, inhaling her perfume made dusky by the smoke swirling around her body. There is something about a woman smoking a cigarette, the way she exhales smoke to speak in a voice low and husky, like Lauren Bacall's or Eartha Kitt's. A nude figure of voluptuous Hollywood proportions, a side view of legs akimbo. Tobacco Rose sits astride a larger than life pack of Philip Morris cigarettes, filled with a careful tumble of white cylindrical shapes. Her elbows bent onto the plane of another pack as tabletop, while she fondles a cup of what must be coffee, since coffee and cigarettes have long been companions, each a stimulant to the other. Her hair a pale blonde against a deep yellow background. Both accentuate the creamy tones of her bared flesh against the oversized white cigarettes. She, the figure of the pliant female, yielding all her curves to the cigarettes with their elongated straight lines, thrusting their way toward her vulnerable flesh. From Philip Morris in Richmond, VA, Tobacco Road winds toward NC, through field after field of leaves turning from green into gold, on into Durham with its Chesterfields, Lucky Strikes, and where the Marlboro Man rides high through Bright Leaf, the legendary cigarette tobacco, flue cured by generations of farmers to a fragrant, burnished copper, then turns toward Winston-Salem, where R.J. Reynolds still rolls cigarettes into its venerable camels, while farmers, black and white, toil in the fields during long, hot days and keep watch at barns during deep and humid nights, while golden sheaves of tobacco leaves cure into a harvest, transformed into the cigarettes women lift to their lips for men to light. From Tobacco Rose to Tobacco Road, a cigarette has always been more than a smoke. Now, this is one that was in Roads Taken, a different take on something of the same. This is called Mother's Body. I retired early so I could spend more time with my mother in North Carolina. And so this is something that comes out of those times spent with her in her later years. Mother's body at 95 still moves with a stateliness as she steps into her bath, while I, her handmaiden now, encircle her waist with my arms to steady her as she eases herself into the waiting warmth of water. shoulders always erect, breasts sloping toward a waist that's never lost its inward curve, flesh like white satin and cool to the touch. She still moves with the grace of Bathsheba as she once stood poised before lowering herself into the bath. Or Susanna, disrobed by her maidens at pool's edge, before entering the soothing waters. Figures of females, always vulnerable in that intimate moment of immersing themselves into the transparency of water. Instead of material goods these days, I often give people I admire, people I love, poems. And I'm a justice of the peace and I marry people, so I do poems for them as well. And my marriage ceremony is a poem that varies from couple to couple. And this is a poem that I wrote to thank David Budbill for reading a manuscript and helping me with it. On stacking wood and writing poems for David Budbill. And the epigraph is by Adrian Rich. Imagine the existence of something uncreated. There's an art to stacking wood that's akin to writing a poem, needing its pieces like words placed just so, one notched into the other, making rows into lines, a symmetry sturdy enough to bear the weight, accumulating row by row, one on top of the other. From the pile just unloaded, cord by cord, outside the barn door, where it spills about on the grass, blocking the drive, choosing each piece by eye, in time begins to build from what looks a haphazard sprawl, with no hint of what may lie within. A workable design that may unlock the rhythm in the work and the word. Best done in solitude, to mull what's needed, just where and why, to make sense of what can appear a daunting puzzle. Words yet unformed, inchoate, wood split into varying thicknesses, giving off its resonance, resinous fragrance, with no clear forward scheme. Such necessary precision of mind and hand takes me beyond myself, disembodied, and thrusts me into another sphere where I exist both beyond being and beyond constraints of time and place, where I ponder without thinking the word ponder, and finger the splintered, rounded knot, giving off its freshly split sweetness. There, it's as if these, the words to name my world, and the cords of wood stacked for winter's coming, might guide me toward their common rhythms. How am I doing for time? I don't want to overuse my time.
You definitely have more time. And I think it is also up to you based on how many poems you want to read. I think we're all
I just have,
sitting with
I have,
rapt attention.
I have two more.
I
And
think
then
that's
we,
perfect.
is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yes.
And this is one some of you have heard. It's what I wrote for my son's birthday last year. And it's called Some Things Gold Can Stay for Bert on his birthday. A boy of 12 or so took the measure of aging sugar maples lining the road before his house, their wintry skeletons reaching skyward, naked without their green and gold canopy. There, taking his own measure as well, he nailed taps and hung the pocked and dented metal buckets, treasure from weekly trips to the nearby town dump. With chunks of wood from the family woodpile and cleared space in what had once been open pasture. This son, born of the stubborn hope held out each March and April by Vermont's uncertain spring, jumped from the school bus each day, gathered the promise held out by the watery sap flowing into his buckets. Younger sister by his side, he tended the fire, hunkering low. There he gazed into sweet ribbons of steam, as if he might see into the very life of things. A man now approaching a midpoint of what he might expect of living, with many acres of Vermont sugar bush under his daily gaze, a stewardship sacred, its meaning and measure taken those many years ago when he first tasted the sap of his youth and found it sweet. From that child's outdoor fire, the man he has now become turns his hand to crafting the traditional sugar house, squatting along a low ridge beneath a maple grove, poised for the downward flow of late March and April sap as it rises in each trunk with the warmth of days tempered by the season's frosty nights. Such it is that an annual ritual charted from a memory, a fragment from that earlier dream of what it could mean for the truly human life when such a ritual of return can preserve the child in the man. Such it is each spring with its fleeting promises of yet more years to come. You can tell I read William Wordsworth and Robert Frost. No mysteries there. And the last poem is you'll recognize the situation and the context and the landscape of this poem. There are, in this poem, there's an epigraph from Frederick Douglass. And then within the poem, there's a quotation embedded in the poem from Douglass's Independence Day speech. Signs. There's not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Frederick Douglass, 1852. As if borne aloft by stirrings of air, music floated up the grassy slope and over picnicking knots of friends and families as we quieted to Strauss and Handel, sipping wine and savoring early July's bounty of berries, as sweet to the tongue as the violin to the ear. A July 4th, a Vermont Symphony Orchestra concert, now a tradition like the statewide communal readings earlier in the week of Frederick Douglass' fierce questioning of America's Independence Day. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, that I had the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Into this still mostly white audience, in this mostly white affluent town, in the wealthiest, mostly white county, strode a tall man, his broad chest covered in a blood-red t-shirt with a Southern Cross of white stars on bands of blue, the Confederate flag on his front and on his back, emblazoned there for all to see. By his side, a large-boned woman kept step with him. Her short skirt unfolded front and then back into a gauzy American flag with the sway of her hips, as if waving to all she passed, its familiar red, white, and blue, to some faraway notes of glory, glory, hallelujah. The sun dimmed, the soft breeze dropped, the sounds of the 1812 overture, Stars and Stripes Forever, dying away against the Adirondacks' blue peaks, where Lake Champlain had glimmered only moments before in the sinking afternoon sun. In its place, it was as if I could still make out hazy outlines of signs written in the language some called Jim Crow, for whites only, coloreds in the balcony, in a world now and always, brilliantly, insistently alive with its array of colors beyond the fireworks, beginning to flare their patterns in stars across the sky, the stars fading with the sinking afternoon sun. So that's it.
I think we can unmute to clap.
Yes, everyone, please do
Yes.
just momentarily unmute, and thank you so much.
Gotta put that up.
And also,
Without so
have-
many of you, these poems wouldn't exist. So thank you. So many.
Well, we've come to the portion of our really big show when we have questions, comments, tributes. Any of you would like to ask or make, you can unmute and ask Mary Jane or tell Mary Jane something.
I'll break the silence with a very brief comment just to say that I'm so glad to start to get to know you. Hopefully there will be lots more, and hopefully more in-person tea, afternoons of tea at your house in your lovely garden. But thank you so much for these poems that you've just shared. They really feel in each poem like I just read a whole history and a few novels. But they're so captivating and magical, and I really am able to dive into each, and you're a master of the craft. So thank you for sharing your poems. I'm honored to be working with Sundog, and I know that we'll continue to rely on you as a friend, even though you're stepping down, but we're still going to bug you with love. Thank you so much, Mary Jane.
Well, when I see the poets in this audience, the ones that I can see, I am truly humbled, because there's plenty of good poets right here in this audience. So.
Mary Jane, I really like how you find yourself still drawing on your North Carolina past, although you've lived in Vermont for 50 plus years. And so in your own mind, how do these two places like interact and inform each other when you're writing? You seem to have so many poems that draw on both places.
Well, I think part of it comes from some people. When we went from North Carolina to Vermont, people said, oh, what a difference that will be. Well, of course, there is a difference, but they both states with an emphasis and an appreciation of the land and rural places, and a way of life that was more alike than different. And my father was a farmer, and my mother a public school teacher. And I lived in a tiny little town about the size of Jericho Center where I lived. So there were not a lot of difference. The main differences were the differences in the populations. And I have to say, I think growing up in the segregated South was both a burden and gave me insights that I might not have had otherwise. And especially since my area was Southern American literature and African American literature, so that it's as if I were constantly thinking about these things with my students and with my own development and thinking and education. I felt that I was constantly being educated and learning. And I think Vermont provided a good place for that to take place. Of course, my father visited once, and we were sitting on the banks of the Lamoille, and a gunshot rang out, and he said, "The Yankees are after me." Oh.
Other questions?
We want to give time if anyone also just has comments or things to share, tributes for Mary, questions or tributes. I interrupted someone.
I have a question. The many of the poems that you read tonight focus very heavily on historical elements. And I'm just wondering if that has always been if that has always been a focus in your poetry, or if you came to that later. I'm just kind of interested in like the thematic arc and especially where like the historical stuff fit on there.
I think it's sort of always been there. And in my, I had to do a lot of research for my, the second volume, art volume that I did the, so much research on water in Vermont and the significance of water. And so I learned a lot about the history of Vermont while working on that long poem. And then I discovered when I was teaching in South Africa, a real relationship between what was happening to the British and the Scots who were fighting creating the South Africa as an apartheid, so that and many of those Scots came from were fighting against the native peoples in South Africa to North Carolina, where they became slave owners. So, they were unfortunate interrelationship. So I'm doing some work on that too. But I guess growing up in North Carolina, in my little town, my family used to sit around and talk about the past and talk about, generations past, and genealogy was very important, both in Black and white families. And so I think I was always aware, and I studied history a lot as well as literature. So I think it was natural to be interested in history. And I had to learn a lot about native peoples in Vermont to write the book on water. I'm not sure that answers a question. I'm sort of thinking on my feet, or not. I'm not on my feet. I'm sitting down, but sort of thinking it through. But I have been, and I think teaching African-American history, literature, you learn the history as well. So, and with what has been going on in the last 20, 30 years too, and what's going on just here now. And I think we need to know our history. I think it's vital that we know our history.
Other questions, tributes, comments?
I'll step in if I may. Neil, it's Barbara. Just a thank you to Mary Jane for a lovely reading, but first for the work she has done over the years founding Sundog with her co-founders, and also the work she and Patricia are doing on behalf of anti-racism work in Vermont. I'm very grateful. I have come to know Mary Jane, not as well as I would like to yet, but as someone has this fierce and generous grace. And I'm always struck by when I think, wow, she's so graceful and gracious. And then I think, wow, she's really fierce. She knows how to get stuff done. So it's a duality that I love and that I sometimes associate with Southern women. So I'm grateful for just just that history and continuing work. And I love the reading. I admire the historical pieces, as Emer and others do, but I was very much taken by the cigarette smoking poem. I thought the imagery in it was stunning, and I love how you stayed with the imagery and just kept going in deeper and deeper. And I wondered if you have any reflections on writing or revising that poem that you'd share.
That was one of the most interesting projects I have ever done. And I read it at the Fleming because it was chosen as one to be read. And I had given a reading as part of the Painted Word series an earlier year at the Fleming. And there were lots of undergraduates there, a good audience, but more undergraduates came up to say something about the cigarette poem than they ever did about anything else. And then I ran into some undergraduates at one of the coffee shops, and the young woman looked at me and she said, "You're the one who wrote that cigarette poem." So I see this 80-something woman writing such a poem shattered some preconceptions, maybe.
You may have set back the anti-tobacco movement a decade or so. It was pretty alluring. Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a tobacco culture.
Sure.
It really was. And I'm sorry to say that I smoked for too many years. And but thank goodness neither of my children has ever at least smoked tobacco. I know they have probably smoked some other things, but
Did you know I'm here, Mom?
my daughter is, yes, this is my daughter, and my granddaughter, Ann Dickerson and Layla Elian.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that one of your children was actually here on the Zoom. So
I can confirm she does.
I
I'm
do.
joking.
You're always a mother. You're always a mother.
Oh, boy.
Well, Mary Jane, I have a few
Yes.
words to say. Your historical touch goes right here in Jericho Center. I mean, you have stitched this town together in many, many ways. All the inspiration that you have brought to so many of us. The Snowflake Bentley poem a couple of years back, a long one. So thank you. You've been great.
And that was fun to write. I had to go into special collections and do a lot of research for that poem. And I learned a lot about Jericho, about Vermont. And so I was asked to write that poem. I always say yes if somebody asks me to write a poem for a commemorative occasion or something. So I learn a lot by doing that. But go ahead.
I just wanted to say, can you hear me? I just wanted to say that you grew up in tobacco country, but your poem about stacking wood is more than doing research. You have stacked wood as only someone who's stacked wood knows about it. And the same with the poem about Bert's sap and the trees. So you do your research, but it's so real and concrete and palpable. And having been in a writing group with you, I also want to say what a generous reader you always are. Generous, kind, and gracious. I thank you for
That's
that.
the kind of person she is.
Well,
Thank
Laura wrote a beautiful poem for her daughter, their daughter Megan's wedding. And I was just happy to be a sounding board for that poem. And Megan was here earlier. Megan was my student at UVM as well. It's
Here.
Thank you.
You are so welcome.
Mary Jane is someone who has known you a very long time, from my shaking and quaking as a young student in 1973 at the experimental program at UVM, having just been so incredibly grateful at how you have illumined the path for me, not only as a woman, as a teacher, and as a poet. You have offered so much inspiration and fierceness, as has been mentioned. I'm wondering what nourishes you and if that changes over time.
When you said that, Patricia, and I'm so delighted to see you, when you said that, I know what nourishes me. Certainly my family has. I've been fortunate, even though I've lost him, in the man I married, in the children we had. So I've been fortunate in family, and my children and grandchildren continue to nourish me. And my community members, like Bill and Isabella and others, and my colleagues at UVM, but probably most of all, my students, like you, like Joanne Mellon here, and others who that I've had as students and as co-poets in a variety of settings, so that I feel as if I'm constantly nourished by working with others and by being part of a community of poets, as well as a civic community in Jericho. I love being a justice of the peace and working at elections and marrying people, but soon I'll have to give that over to others. But but have I answered your question, Patricia? But I would say, first of all, people like you, my students. And I keep running into students, whether, it's at the Toyota place, or it's on a train platform, or on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum, or wherever I run into students, former students. And that's one of the joys, one of the real joys.
That's a testimony to how many lives you've touched, Mary Jane, and continue.
Well, you've touched mine. You've all touched mine. And Patricia has been such a generous, she has been so generous to Sundog Poetry and has helped us so much from the very beginning. So it's people like Patricia who help make our work possible, who have helped make our work possible.
Well, we're coming up on 8 o'clock. We don't have to break up the Love Fest if there are a few more comments people want to make.
Mary Jane?
Yeah.
Hi, this is
Oh,
Wayne Howe. I live on
yes,
the other side of
Wayne.
town. I just was really struck with the strong theme about history, but talking locally, it really strikes me, there's an official history of towns, and Jericho certainly has its own, but it's people like your work and Tracy Campbell Pearson's work and Marguerite Hurley Wolf's work that paint kind of an alternate history to the town of Jericho. And I just want to recognize that you're part of that. You know what? You sing a different song than kind of the official black tomes that we have, the official versions, but there's still a really important part of town. And I've picked up your work at the Jericho Center Market, and I love your spirit. So that's why I was here tonight. So I just wanted to call it, it's a little piece of history, and it's a little different way of looking at the town we live in. So thank you very much for that.
I have to say Wayne is very important in the town of Jericho. And
Thank you.
Because towns like ours, so many towns in Vermont are run by volunteers in all kinds of positions. They're the ones who do the work. And I'm part of the Jericho Community Center, the Jericho Center Preservation Association. And, as somebody referred to the armies of women who do the work at the community center, and then they're at the town hall. And I went to a funeral yesterday, and it was a sad but joyous occasion, but it was full of neighbors and people who have contributed so much to the life of the town, like Isabella Martin and Wayne Howe and so many others. We're so fortunate. Thank you, Wayne.
Well, it's past 8 o'clock, Mary Jane, and I was going to read a lot of sections from your poem before the interstate, but don't have the time at this point. But just wanted to say that part of what I love in the poem is what I love in much of your work, this real attention to thick sensory detail and through the landscape and the animals and the humans moving through it, and establishing this definite sense of time and place and history and attitude and a passion for whatever you see. And I think this is in your life as well as your poems, that this seems to be your method of attentive witness to the details of the world, and then your vital, passionate response to it. And I really thank you for that and for everything you've done for Sundog and for our lives within that. And here to you. So thank you.
Well, you're so very welcome. I couldn't ask for a better life. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
For everyone's information as well, thank you so much, Mary Jane. I will be putting the recording of this, and I know that some folks lost internet connection, and maybe some folks were